we first learned how to dance before we could speak. So even as kids, before we could speak, the first thing that we do is to move and is to dance. So it's an inherent capability that we have as people.
Now, when we think Youth Month, when we talk Youth Month, we're thinking rather Hector Peterson, we're thinking the 16th, we're thinking the portrait, and yet again, we're thinking Soweto. But yet again, the narrative has changed. Today, we're talking young people, what the future holds. We're talking artificial intelligence, we're talking what lies ahead in terms of entrepreneurship and the likes. And who other than having Ndumiso to basically have the conversation with us. It's not just a conversation, it's a strategic focus in terms of where the youth is looking and where the youth is actually the direction is facing. So I'm just going to give you a couple of highlights in terms of who Ndumiso is. This is just a snippet. So Ndumiso Kubheka is an award-winning economist and chief executive at the National Youth Development Agency with extensive experience in the areas of macroeconomic research, strategy development, corporate governance, trade and investment promotion, and facilitation, with global exposure, and has advised multinational companies across banking, pharmaceuticals, mining, and ICT, and including the public sector on macro industry risk and strategy. Awarded various accolades, one that stands out being the Mail and Guardian Top 200 Youth in South Africa. Ndumiso is an author of a book titled Reflections on South Africa, and this is a book that was written about 13 years ago while he was reflecting on South Africa as a young person. The foreword of the book is written by the Presidency, and he holds an MBA from Gibbs and also completed the Alternative Investment Program from Harvard Business School. Now, I am Masake Maleka. I'm pleased to drive this conversation for it to be a strategy and for it to basically be an insight for young people. Now that I have extensively went into a Google search, just in one sentence, Ndumiso, it would be very interesting to hear who is Ndumiso.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, Masaki. I think the introduction was quite interesting. Ndumiso, I think is a servant, firstly, who's also passionate about the future of this country. In a sentence, I think that would be who I am.
All right. So when you're saying the future of the country, I think most of the time what we refer to as the future of the country is young people and the bracket that we put. I think just to have an oversight with you stepping into the NYDA, what was the initial goal? Is it something that has always been top of mind, or is it something that found you? Is it a dream, or has it been a passion?
Well, not necessarily. I think firstly, I'm a beneficiary of the NYDA from 13, 14 years ago. NYDA was a sponsor to a leadership development program for young people called One Day Leader. Okay. And this was done together with SABC One and, of course, some private sector partners at the time. And as a result of that competition, I think it played an important part in my own youth development journey. Sure. And of course, honing in on, some leadership skills that are important for the future. I've always contributed to my community through volunteering in civil society, sure. In the church, and also been enterprising as well. And so when this program came forward through the main sponsorship coming from NYDA, I entered it, and season 2, I had the good fortune of winning season 2 at the time, which then opened the pathway of opportunity. And as a result, then I got my first job at the time as a researcher, and later on in my career then got into business for the big part of my career. And of course, when, the opportunity was availed to say, NYDA is looking for a CEO. I thought it would be a great opportunity, for me to pay it forward to an institution that contributed towards my own development. And I think it's also important to demonstrate to young people that it's important to give back to communities and spaces that have given to you, particularly if it's in service of your country.
That's great. I think when it comes to philanthropy, we tend to think monetary. We tend to think it needs to be something very tangible. And it's something that young people don't get a hold of in terms of actually understanding that there's so much that one can do to just give back to society. I think what comes through is what defines, a moment that shaped your leadership philosophy as an individual.
Sure. I think, look, my mother, I think, for the most part, is who and what shaped my leadership philosophy. Being a teacher and later on a principal of a school in a farm area. And I think, oftentimes she'd come back home and tell us certain stories of young people who come from very difficult situations at home. I think the one that is consistently at the back of my mind is a story of a young person in a classroom who unfortunately, had an incident in the classroom, vomiting and so forth. So, of course, as a responsible educator, she then inquired as to what is wrong, what is happening. And that young person, in essence, shared with her at the time that the reason why that happened is because the previous night they had eaten pap and cooking oil, just to make sure that the hunger of the family is cured. I think that shaped, even to this day, a lot of the thinking around what still needs to be done to change the landscape of young people. And so I think that's also what informs the work that I do.
That's great. I think just to draw back to that, when we think of education and the education system in South Africa, most of the time what young people rather were directed to back then was obviously, the traditional career path. And right now, when you highlight it with your mother, I think when it comes to educators, we always say that needs to also be form of a calling. Now, I'm coming back to the education system and the curriculum in South Africa for young people. Do you feel in this rate, or rather where we are as a country, as an economy, is the curriculum shaped for the young people that we're trying to advance for the future?
I think there's a big opportunity in education to, shape it more, to be orientated towards industries of the future. Of course, technology is a big driver of the industries that are being shaped and that young people will be participating in. For example, if we think about agriculture as a case in point, the average age of a farmer in South Africa is above 55 years old. So automatically that then says to us that young people are not playing in that sector. But now all of a sudden, with the introduction of technology, drone technology is now being used to oversee, the quality of the farm, which is, I think, things that would make a job quite interesting for a young person and not in the traditional sense. So that's my chat.
All right. Got you.
So I think, of course, our education system can then speak to more the role of technologies in, for instance, driving greater productivity in farming and the employment opportunities for young people. The other component, I think, is AI and quantum computing and all of that technological advancements and the opportunities that it presents for young people. We know today e-commerce is a big thing, and you can imagine if e-commerce also plays a big part in communities that we come from, in rural areas, in farms, in township areas. It presents opportunities for young people who are enterprising as well. So I think, of course, there's an opportunity to ensure that our curriculum does shape the thinking and, the outlook of young people to be focused around those industries of the future.
All right. No, I think that's such a great perspective. Thanks for putting it like that. And I think just to essentially be, the mouthpiece of young people as we speak in this moment, it's very nice, to say all these nice and, technology, IT, coding, but I think we also need to consider the rural communities that, which serves or rather a huge part of South Africa's population. When it comes to something like that, as the National Youth Development Agency, when we're looking at the rural communities, obviously there is a lot that is being done. However, when it comes to advancing, careers of the future, how is it that we're looking at that perspective for now?
Yeah, I think it's a big one. The National Youth Development Agency, beginning of this year, 2026, it approved a rural strategy for young people located in rural areas. And this has been a big focus area for our leadership team and, of course, the board in ensuring that the programs and products and services for young people reach as many young people as possible. I think even at the end of last year, there was a whole sort of exhibition and expo of opportunities for further education and training, employment opportunities for young people in Nkandla, for example. example, whom it was the first time that the NYDA held, I think there were over 1,000 young people in that particular program, providing opportunities to them. The NYDA is also working quite closely with tribal authorities in rural areas in particular, who have specific asks and tell the agency to say young people in our communities want to start their own stores. They want to further their education. And of course, there are CETAs and of course universities and bursaries and scholarships that are available that the agency is then able to facilitate for those specific young people working with traditional leadership. So that also is a pathway and facilitates, greater access for young people to those kinds of opportunities, which I think ordinarily it is not necessarily being done as effectively. And there's also a big opportunity to make sure that it's as widespread as possible across every single province in the country. And so what excites me is that it's a big focus area for this administration in the National Youth Development Agency, and there are some exciting things that are coming up in that regard.
No, that's great. And I think in, the research that has been done, the rate of unemployment is something that is spoken of. However, we actually do not talk about what is being done in South Africa at this moment to mitigate, the rate of unemployment and it escalating even higher. And I must say, I must really applaud the National Youth Development Agency for, taking those initiatives as well, because I think we tend to focus a lot on the negative and don't necessarily look at the positive that is being, done. And I think obviously looking at the trajectory, I just really want to hear when it comes to the, youth unemployment rate, the mitigating elements, or rather what it is that you are currently, working on, above and beyond what you have said. I think it's the strategy of the National Youth Development Agency to mitigate, the rate of unemployment and for it escalating any further. And I think above and beyond that, there's so many other various facets to unemployment as well, because we are also getting the traditional careers where young people are getting into the traditional careers but are not even acquiring, jobs. So where does entrepreneurship fit in?
That's a great question. So I think the unemployment question in South Africa, it's a macroeconomic issue. And, the role of the National Youth Development Agency is not to address youth unemployment in its mandate. It's to coordinate and facilitate youth development as a mandate. The question of addressing youth unemployment, then the NYDA, through its programs, it plays a role to then facilitate that process. The conundrum that we find ourselves as a country is that we are finding an economy that is not growing at a pace that is fast enough to absorb as many young people as possible. For example, if we have a situation whereby in any given year, we have 200,000 young people who graduate from university. The question then becomes, do we have equivalent job openings in the South African economy? Just as a simple case in point. The second part is, if we have, 500,000, 600,000 young people who matriculate, are there equivalent job opportunities that the economy is, creating as a consequence to facilitate those young people to be absorbed? And then it's a compounding effect. 1 year it's 500,000. The next year is the next 500,000, making it 1 million. Next year. So ultimately, and that's why the position of the NYDA now is to position its coordination role in bringing together all of the enabling parts of government and the private sector in ensuring that pathways for opportunities from employment, education, further education, and entrepreneurship are coordinated, so that a young person who matriculates and who's enterprising knows, if I want to start a business and people whom I know, they are more likely to fund me because I'm starting out, the NYDA is where you start, because we offer the grant funding program. But the moment you grow and you require further support and investment, you can go to, the likes of SETFA, for example. The NYDA facilitates that path for you to be able to go there. If you're bigger than SETFA, you go to the next level, NEF and so forth. So your path for entrepreneurial development is clear as a young person. And so that's one of the key areas that the agency is doing currently to coordinate as part of that mandate of coordinating youth development. At the level of further education and training, we have, of course, the problem of young people whom we lose between grade 9 and grade 10. And then, the country is very difficult to locate. Where are these young people? And we call them that they're in the category of the NEET category, not in employment, education, or training.
Mm-hmm.
The question therefore becomes, as the NYDA, to facilitate opportunities for those young people, how do we then bring in institutions of higher learning, TVET colleges, CETA, sector education and training opportunities, the bursaries and scholarships that are available there, and of course, technical skills training opportunities to that cohort of young people.
All right.
In a way that facilitates further learning and education for them, which they can either go through, pursuing employment opportunities or, go through the entrepreneurial route.
Mm-hmm.
One of my close friends who's a doctor in the field of higher education, in one of his master's study,
right.
he did a study that actually focused on young people who are in TVET colleges. And what he found is that young people who came together and brought themselves as electricians and plumbers and started a business together. And they did relatively well. And then what he found is that their salary was higher than that of a dentist, for example. And often young people wouldn't think that a plumber or an electrician would earn more than a dentist.
Yeah.
So that's also part of the reshaping that the NYDA is doing currently in its facilitative role of youth development. I should say it's a big task because the demand is huge.
Yeah.
And the NYDA is a relatively small entity in the bigger scheme of things. But the power lies in the coordination role. Because it's located in the Presidency, that coordination, I think, is an area of strength that the NYDA will continue to ensure that it facilitates those pathways for young people.
All right, which is very interesting that we went from young people, we're talking 18 to 35, then we went to grade 9s. And where I'm going with this is that when you look at the trajectory, or rather the nature of the development phase of a child, I think where we actually lose our young people, and it's a conversation that's actually happening on social media, is with early childhood development. And I think the question here then comes in to say, are we then going to wait to lose the grade 9s, then lose the grade 7s, only to realize that actually the problem lies with the foundational elements rather of the education system or maybe our community systems? So where I'm going with this is that with the programs that are being set, is there anything in terms of strategy that is looking at actually mitigating the core foundational issues that we are actually facing as a country? Because I think when you look at the trajectory of how things are going, we're starting at grade 12 and saying, okay, now it's grade 10. We're going to be choosing final subject, grade 9. Okay, wait, what do you mean I need to be choosing subjects? That's when the kids are like, oh, hold up. What are you talking about? But actually, the main problem here is that when the child was in grade 1, already we have stats that our grade 1s can't read. But obviously we're waiting it through and we're obviously having them and we're losing them in grade 9. But in actual fact, we've lost them in grade 1 already. So what are some of the strategies that we're looking at as a country and above and beyond the National Development Agency, in your opinion, or rather, your perception, what are we looking at in terms of the root cause, or rather the root problem as to why we end up facing the loss in grade 9 and then we get to grade 12 where kids don't know the trajectory, or rather where the future is leading them? What are we saying about early childhood development? Because ultimately, in trying to mitigate the issues of the youth, we actually need to look at early childhood development.
You couldn't be more correct. Currently, what the NYDA does through the program called the National Youth Service.
Okay.
The National Youth Service is really, it's really voluntary and community service done by young people. Some of us, our own development has been as a consequence of volunteering in our communities. So we run that program and we do it together with the Department of Basic Education. Banapele is a specific program. You would have noted over the last 10 years, there has been a shift in basic education where there's been an introduction of ECDs within primary schools to address this particular question of the first 1,000 days of a child's life. From nutrition, from the psychosocial support, and of course from the families from which these young people are coming from. And so ultimately, it does start at home, which does need to be addressed, whether we're talking about, can that child be supported in terms of their own educational development before they go to the ECD, the early childhood development center. And then at the level of the ECD, the interventions that I think from a DBE point of view, the Department of Basic Education has put in place to expand that kind of access to young people within their first 1,000 days. So I think it's a positive step that has been taken. And so that's why the NYDA, through young people who work through the National Youth Service, is to support those ECDs where there are gaps. We know that, the public service doesn't have a lot of resources to expand it as far and wide as possible. And so leveraging the existing resources and partners as well, and young people who care about their communities to play a part in really making sure that those ECD centers operate at the level at which it can support the first 1,000 days of young people. So I think those are some of the interventions that will start to bear fruit over the next couple of years through some of these developments that have taken place.
That's great. I think how I normally facilitate my conversations is that I like taking it from the root cause, then going up, which ultimately you have addressed that element of, using young people within communities to aid these ECD centers. And I think one of the other entities or that have been doing good is Nalibale with, their reading programs and all of that. And I think it's just great things. I mean, growing up would, wake up to the SABC, maybe playing all these, the fancy stuff that actually raised us along the way, and it made you excited to go to school, to learn, to read. And I think that's where, this exciting element of school and learning then comes in from ECD phase down up. So I think now we're going to step into our young people, because it wouldn't have served us justice to address the issues that young people are facing without actually addressing where it is that they come from and where the issues stem from, which is early childhood development. So in terms of, the biggest disconnect when it comes to South Africa's, education system, where do you think, in terms of the education system and the labor sector, where is the biggest disconnect there? Because what we're also trying to do here is facilitate or have a conversation that will aid a young person to see where the gaps lie in order for them to mitigate and also go and grab those opportunities where the gaps are. Yeah.
Sure, it is really quite a complex one, hey? So at any given point in time, there are about 700,000 jobs that are advertised publicly. Then the question therefore becomes, who is able to fill those jobs and why aren't those jobs being filled?
Sure.
So at the first level, it may be a question of, are there sufficient skills to be able to respond to the jobs that are being advertised in the market as a first point of call? But the second part is, how do we grow that 700,000 to 1.4 million jobs that are available? Then it becomes a macroeconomic question. What do we mean by that? One, the investment that the public service or government makes in the economy, in important projects such as infrastructure, as a case in point. Infrastructure has been proven to have a multiplier effect in terms of the creation of jobs, because it not only starts at the construction site, it starts at the place where the brick is being made to be able to be transported, which is another economic activity that takes place to arrive at that construction site. So one could almost mention 3 or 4 levels of value chains that are created through infrastructure. And so I think that's the first point that needs to be focused on and accelerated quite significantly, and presents young people with those opportunities for growth and development. The second part, I think, there's what we discussed earlier around emerging industries that we're seeing. I don't think maybe 10 years ago we would have thought that you would be earning income through your cell phone. Being an influencer, e-commerce. At some point, I used to see on social media a lot of content around drop shipping and that kind of stuff as a new hustle, And those are industries of the future that need to be presented to young people. But we're also seeing young people who are taking up those opportunities and getting information for themselves on TikTok, on Twitter, and the likes. So again, it therefore requires that responding to the urgent need of development for now, whilst ensuring that the opportunities for the future are there. Currently, there are young people working together with colleagues in China that are who are influencers. They are currently in China right now, learning further development around influencing and commercializing influencing as a business, and of course coming back to growing their businesses as influencers, but also having a train-the-trainer model, training other peers in the industry to say, look, in China, this is how this thing is made to be a fully functioning, running business, and to, import those kinds of skills so that we're able to expand them for more young people to use them. So when they come back, then they have the responsibility to pay it forward to other young people. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a young person who currently has a huge following. I mean, you can have a following of 100 followers who maybe might be your friends from primary school, high school.
That's interesting.
And then you get, that insight from somebody who has 60,000 followers to say, this is how this business works. Do this, that, and the other in terms of getting people to pay you for what you do on your platform. How many businesses are in your community? 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 4 businesses. Do they want to reach more people for their customers? This is how you position yourself to be able to get them to pay you even 500 Rand for a month to market their business.
Yeah.
That then I think it then develops that entrepreneurial sort of tenacity and skill set. Yeah. So it's that kind of, I think, balancing that it will define the industries of the future and opportunities for young people.
That's actually very interesting. And I'm sure the young people would be very excited to also hear more about this. And I think with the influencing, or rather, the social media platforms on its own, it's always nice to have these structured, whether it's a course or whatever, that basically, it is something that young people are interested in when it comes to social media platforms. But it's also nice for, for example, with, entities like the NYDA to essentially set up somewhat of a structure that will enable the, young people to essentially utilize their social media platforms correctly. Coming back to that element of social media platforms, the regulation of those kind of trainings or platforms, because my thing is that it is another thing to come through. And I think we do know ultimately, with every good thing, there is a mitigating factor of something bad. How do we then work around the regulatory frameworks when it comes to careers within the social media? Because right now we can actually colloquially put it as it is careers within social media spaces, because it is, the innovative mindset that comes in with, what do I do with my small following in order to create, an income for myself? How do we then as a society maintain, to regulate those kind of elements in order for not a random person to come through and say, hey, we're going to China, we're going to Turkey to do A, B, C, and D. But how do we maintain them to be regulated within society? Because it is a career, or rather it is an area of interest that young people, I mean, I'm talking, my 6-year-old niece is already jiving around on TikTok, and I'm thinking, geez, I was hoping you become a doctor or a lawyer, but it's taking a whole different path. And I think I can imagine parents are worried. And how do we as young people also, validate our parents that it is something that you can, make money from, the media platform, the arts and social sciences. It is something that you can still drive your passion through that above and beyond traditional, careers that are still doing great in their own respect. So how do we maintain the regulations?
Yeah, I think it's an important balancing act for the following reasons. So this particular industry we're talking about, in the formal sense, it's classified as the creative and cultural industry, CCI. And when you look at its contribution to the economy as it relates to the number of jobs it creates and its nominal contribution to GDP, it's almost equivalent to agriculture. So that already tells you that this is an important sector in the economy. And we know that South Africa and South Africans have a comparative advantage when it comes to creativity, innovation, the arts, dancing, and so forth, and music. So it's a competitive industry that South Africa can compete with other countries around the world. I think maybe that's the first important acknowledgement. The second, around regulation, I think that is where structured programs then come in. Because, of course, a lot of our parents may have not been aware of industries that are currently young people are earning an income from. And so a structured intervention through, the creative industry sort of programs then provides that layer of opportunity for young people. We do have some institutions of higher learning that offer, further education when it comes to, filmmaking, the arts, and so forth. But at a high school level, at the least, I think there's an opportunity there around. These are some of the, job opportunities or industries that can be tapped into. This is the size of this market in the South African case. And how do you then create that as a pathway for yourself? If you are really a talented young person, maybe you're a good musician, or maybe you're just good with social media strategy.
Sure.
You can even support other players in the space to grow their following as well.
Okay.
So I do think there's certainly, to your regulation piece, a greater need for structured programs to support that work. And finally, we had started, when I joined, with a creative economy workshop, which we were working together with some lawyers who are focused on intellectual property.
Okay.
So oftentimes you find you and I were seated here and we decided to create a song and we're jamming, and all of a sudden we've created what we think is a hit.
Got you. And it will be a hit.
And it becomes a hit.
Trust
right?
me,
Yeah. Because you're in it.
Got
so
you.
it'll be a hit. So it becomes a hit. Now we get bookings now. There must be structure.
Yeah.
Who's managing those bookings? Who's managing, expectations from the client side, from what they expect from this hit that we've just generated? Who's managing the logistics around that particular hit so that we are able to derive the return in the investment that we made through our own giftings in generating this hit?
Okay.
This other part is how have we structured our engagement? Do we have an agreement in place in terms of how we're going to share the profits? Or how are we going to cover our expenses? How are we going to invest in another hit that we can make? Now we can no longer be seated here. We need to invest in a studio setup and what have you. So that particular workshop is to bring in, lawyers from focus on intellectual property, and bring in the business of music and the business of the arts. And so that's where I think through the, structured programs, it can assist in making sure that the regulation is further supported, and that where there are risks associated with an industry, they are further mitigated through that kind of structured intervention.
All right. I think now that we have covered the arts in depth, I think I'm going to go to, higher institutions of learning, and I'm going to go now into our universities where, we do find majority of our young people still want to find themselves within the university institution. Above and beyond getting your degree, I'm going to talk about alternative careers within, traditional careers.
Yeah.
And where I'm going with this is that, for argument's sake, in, going the teaching route, in going the medicine or the legal route or the finance route, there is so much that one can delve into, whether you decide to, if anything, go on social media as a doctor, and do all the things that need to be done. And then, for example, with the finances, I think there has been so much of an increase within the financial services sector, where people are not only focusing on, traditional ways of, going through, whether it's asset management, there is now, private equity, there's now alternative markets. How do we then encourage young people who are within, universities, for argument's sake, colleges and so forth, to essentially also consider the alternative markets? And also, I think it's also up to industries as well to go to young people, to actually, make these industries quite enticing, and for them to provide more information on it. Because I think when you go into mainstream varsity or college, there are certain modules that you need to do up until you finish your third year or your fourth year. And then you get exposed into the next world where you're like, okay, am I going to be an accountant, or am I going to go into privates? Or so how do we then encourage young people who are now not taking the arts, but are taking the traditional route, which is varsity?
So I think it does require a lot of research and sort of foresight on behalf of young people as well.
Okay.
When we look at South Africa, we are a developing country. And so there are certain opportunities and challenges that come with being a developing country. The first part is because there's a lot of development that must still happen. Road infrastructure, particularly in rural areas. One of the board members of the NYDA is from a rural area in KZN. And the question of road infrastructure for those young people, even to go to the nearest town, to access services, is a big challenge. Sure. Even for the NYDA to go to that rural area, because of the road infrastructure, we need to plan, we need to add an extra layer of planning and logistics to make sure that whatever intervention is taking place in that community takes place in a way that is meaningful. Okay. And so for young people who pursue the traditional route, it does require a lot of foresight in many ways, in the context of what are the needs of our developing economy or of our developing country. So we know that infrastructure is a key part. If, I'm a finance professional, be it employed or I'm maybe running an investment business, what are some of the funds that are important to pull in order to direct them towards the purposes of furthering development? And we know that the returns there are really almost guaranteed if you do your modeling and planning well, because of the need of a developing economy. You think about the healthcare as a sector. Our public healthcare, it caters to 80% of our population. And it has, a budget equivalent to what private healthcare generates in revenue. Private healthcare, for example, I think it covers in South Africa about 17% of the population. So you already see that dichotomy presents an opportunity for a young person who's in finance, for a young person who's in healthcare, a young doctor. How do I make these services available to communities that might not ordinarily have them available and at a price that makes sense for them? This thing where from the communities that we come from, because of the unaffordability of certain goods, you are able to buy a half loaf for a fraction of the price. Yeah. You're able to buy sugar for 2 rand, 5 rand, because of the affordability of a house. Hafiapaloni and all of those things. You know what I mean? Exactly. Yes. Because of the pricing element in the communities that we operate in. So even young people who are in the traditional route, to respond to the developmental need, can think in those ways to be able to address those needs while also, making a decent living as a consequence. So it does require that level of innovation to address our developmental needs, I think.
All right. I think it would be very selfish of me to carry on with the conversation without actually going on social media to essentially get what young people are also asking. And then we have a question here that says, what role should public-private partnerships play in scaling youth-owned businesses into sustainable enterprises?
I think the biggest part, and maybe it's also from the experience of the NYDA, is in ensuring that the public-private partnerships really take care, again, because we are in a developing economy context, of the investment readiness of young people and youth-owned enterprises. I think when that is done right, then aspects around the preparation of any project becomes much easier. In that preparation of any project, you then understand who maybe are the right investors to bring on board, because you better understand, what you're doing, what is the need, who are the partners that you need to have on board. And so the prospects for success for that business or for that project, it multiplies as a consequence of getting investment readiness correctly. So a lot more investment, in my view, I think needs to be focused in that area. Because when that is done right, it's easy to have any conversation with any investor or any development finance institution around that particular business or that particular investment opportunity. It also makes sure that you've identified the right ecosystem to operate in. Sometimes you might have the right business, but in the wrong environment. You might have, or sometimes you might have the right business at the wrong time in a developing economy context.
I see.
For example, high definition technology, TV, HD TVs, high definition televisions. That technology was available since the 1970s. But why haven't we used high definition television since the 1970s? the supporting infrastructure, the cabling and so forth, to be able to take the detailed type of, quality that HDTV requires was not there at the time. So it was the right technology at the wrong time. Oh. And so I think it's the same context around how we should think about it as young people coming from developing economies, around the solutions that we're providing. If it's the right technology and we're seeing that we're not there yet, what are the earlier steps we need to take to, create those pathways to make sure that there's value at the end of the day? And I think triple Ps play that role in ensuring that that ecosystem is able to make sense at any given point in time.
All right. I think when we look at the technology space within, South Africa, for argument's sake, and for example, when you compare it with the likes of Kenya and how venture capital is there, and particularly, the tech element of VC in Kenya, what is it that you think as South Africa, particularly when it comes to that innovative spark, where is it that you think we're lacking, or where is it that we think we're doing good? Just to answer those two, I think I'm drawing back to, the high definition television element when it comes to time, when it comes to the technology, when it comes to the innovation of that point in time. Where do you think we are lacking, and where do you think we are doing good?
You want an honest answer?
I think I wouldn't want any polishing. Okay. Yes. No, I think the polishing can happen behind the scenes. Yeah. Straightforward.
Look, I think the honest answer is purely a question of risk appetite. Venture capital in its nature refers to having elevated levels of risk. So you have a risk-on sentiment. I think so. In the South African landscape, I think there's a big opportunity in increasing the risk appetite to support youth-owned entrepreneurs and youth-owned ventures, as it were. The capital is there.
Okay.
And so that's why, even from an NYDA perspective, we have elected to take the de-risking positioning in the funding landscape in South Africa. Because we drive grant funding programs, which is one of the flagship programs to support youth-owned entrepreneurs. The positioning of this grant funding program is for it to de-risk youth-owned companies, and it's to de-risk youth or transactions that are driven by young people. Because oftentimes, you look at, debt or equity instruments, and oftentimes, sometimes it requires some form of collateral. How do you expect a 23-year-old to have, some form of collateral for a transaction that they want to have? But the opportunity is there, and it's real. You do need a market actor, such as an NYDA, to play, even if it's a small part, in de-risking that particular transaction, so that the other sort of players and investors in that transaction can have greater levels of comfort in, I can invest, I can bet on this young person, I can bet on this project, I can bet in this company. And so I think that is what is required. And so that's the work that we're actively doing to ensure that the ecosystem is able to increase its risk appetite by ensuring that although NYD is not that significant in the pool, the greater scheme of things, but again, the coordination and facilitative part in bringing in other partners to play that de-risking element so that the risk appetite can be increased. And therefore, you'd see a blooming or blossoming, VC space, a vibrant private equity environment. And of course, angel investing being a thing in investing and in betting in youth-owned initiatives.
Yeah. I think what they normally say is those that are doing good in communities tend to belittle themselves when you say that the NYDA is not that big of a deal. But in actual fact, it is. And where I'm going with this is that we spoke about the technology element of it and essentially having, the NYDA serve as an enabler for that de-risking, basically for one to say, no, you know what, I can actually bet on this young person. So where I'm coming now is within our broader, economical landscape, and also as a country, the one conversation that comes through almost each and every 2, 3, 4 years is, when are we letting young people actually be in leadership positions? And how do we actually bring in the blend between young people and the older generation. And when I say the older generation, I'm really not talking Stone Age, as would talk about it on social media. But when I'm saying a mixture of the two, what I'm referring to is you have young people. There is an element of institutional, knowledge and institutional skill set that comes in with each and every organization. But how do we enable our young people to take leadership positions? Particularly, I think we spoke about the tech space, but now we, going to the other side to say within industries, within the ecosystem, how do we enable young people to take on those leadership positions and also to be enabled by the older people in order for a good turnaround of a succession plan to happen for, a great economy?
I think you've actually answered your own sort of thinking and inquiry, because succession planning is important for any organization and for any country for that matter. I don't think that young people should wait for them to be allowed, to take certain leadership roles.
Gotcha.
I think it's if there's that capability. And oftentimes, at least in my view, I think if there's something that, keeps you up at night, that is a problem in your country, in your community, I think that's a call to leadership. And we should not allow ourselves to, say, hey, if only so-and-so can permit me to do so. Yeah, I think we should actively play. And that's I think perhaps the activist nature in all young people, to play that role. And I also do think that, again, a good balance is required from elders as well. The old African proverb, how do I translate it in English?
No, throw it and we'll see the translation. Yes, so you basically ask the path to those that have walked it.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's also important. It's really to minimize the number of mistakes that we can potentially make as a young person. So I think that blend between young and old is very important. But I don't think that we should wait to be given permission per se. If there's something really that's keeping you up, and you feel that you can actively do something, do it. You are going to make mistakes, that's a guarantee. But the most important thing is to learn from those mistakes and sharpen the areas in which that require sharpening and strengthening.
All right, no, that's very interesting. And then to move back to the NYDA, currently, just to highlight a couple of things that, the organization is doing to transition young people from job seekers to job creators. Because I think, and I'm saying job creators because this creation element is a big buzzword. We're content creators, we're TikTok creators, we're video creators.
Yes.
What is it that is currently happening to see, to basically transition from that narrative of being job seekers and running from door to door to job creators?
There's quite a bit. So of course, the flagship program is the NYDA grant program. And I had mentioned that we are specifically choosing to use that as a de-risking element in youth-owned enterprises and transactions. We're also on a drive to really build a consolidated national youth fund for young people. In other words, to grow the size of youth funding mandates that focuses on de-risking for youth-owned enterprises. So that's a drive that we are actively on now, and some important announcements will be coming through quite soon in that regard, and calling young people to take advantage of those opportunities. The second is the National Youth Service. In this year alone, 100,000 young people will have the opportunity to take up the opportunity in the National Youth Service Program. In this instance, it's really paid community service to achieve a number of things. One, to build social cohesion and nation building for your country and community. Two is to create a pathway for work experience, because when we look at the trajectory of GDP growth in South Africa, and we look at, does GDP growth, does the pattern mimic that of employment growth of young people in the country? We often find that when GDP growth does this, employment growth for young people is here. But for people above 35, you find that it tends to mimic GDP growth.
All right.
So what is a fixation for us is, what is it that a person above 35 years old has that a young person below 35 years doesn't have? And oftentimes you would find that work experience is one of those. Social capital is also one of those, referral. I can vouch for you, and as a sponsor to say, no, that's a candidate you can bet on and give an opportunity for. But sometimes those things you build over years, and through credibility you build with people that you meet over time. So the National Youth Service is intended partially to really address that gap. 100,000 young people through that particular program to bridge that particular gap. And of that cohort, there's a specific percentage that should then transition either to further employment or learning, or we then support through, again, the grant funding program for those who are entrepreneurial in nature. Because the pathways, some others after the program can actually find, I would love to learn more about this. There's one in this year alone, we are doing work with the National Energy Regulator in South Africa. Young people in the National Youth Service program will have the opportunity to support municipalities in making the submissions that are required for tariff setting of electricity to the National Energy Regulator, which is an opportunity that ordinarily would not be there. But all of a sudden, young people who will be part of that cohort will understand how the regulatory environment in South Africa works. I might not have been in that space to begin with. I might be, again, my go-to is the arts, for example.
Sure.
But all of a sudden, I'm understanding, in order for South Africa to set its tariffs, it's done through, of course, the National Energy Regulator, and this is the role of municipalities where I come from, and I'm actively doing that work. All of a sudden, after the National Youth Service Program, I want to further my studies in understanding, a component of law or a component of the regulation that can create another pathway for opportunity. Something that is a big need in South Africa. That's why that intervention is designed. So that's really the work that the NYDA is doing to not only address the needs in the public service, but also to shape new markets from a business and a commercial point of view, but also from an employment opportunity point of view as well.
All right. No, that's very interesting. And I think my other element to the question is that I think the NYDA has essentially mastered, or I think just to be humble as you are putting the NYDA to be and not to essentially blow the horn, has really mastered the concept of providing funding and for the funding to create a sense of innovation, entrepreneurship, and forward thinking. However, we do get a lot of organizations within our communities that do get funding, and essentially the funding becomes somewhat of a dependent kind of, they become dependent on organizations to say, I'm going to go there, and it creates this sense of dependency. So I think funding, for young people and for, the economy has been seen as, when you do get funding, you become dependent on the entity that is providing funding. So how do we then, create that shift where funding is equated to innovation, forward thinking, entrepreneurship, creating and regenerating more, above and beyond funding just being equated to dependency?
That's a great question. One of the ways in which I think the NYDA is actively addressing this area, and this, what oftentimes can be a gap, is really in two ways. In its funding program, before you qualify for funding, you do go through, what we call business management training.
Okay.
This takes you through training from across, life skills, the starting up and the starting up of a business, the running of the business, the compliance components associated with running of that business, and of course components that relate to market linkages for you to grow that business before, of course, you qualify for the grant funding. To be able to address the question of dependency, if you don't go through that training, it filters out those who are serious and those who are not serious. So the dependency, the likelihood of dependency, I think it also reduces a bit for young people who might just be there, of course, for dependency purposes. The other part is work that we are actively doing with the likes of Take A Lot, for example, where interventions do need to be holistic. Young people who, are trained to take advantage of the, e-delivery business. They are provided with the training. They're provided with the licensing that they require for their motor vehicles.
Okay.
And then through the Take a Lot ecosystem, they're also provided with the tools, the motorbike to be able to do so, having gone through the training. And then the following day, you earn an income, just like that. So from someone who might not have matric, for example, and I'm given that kind of opportunity, and we're going to be launching during June month as well, another cohort. Automatically, you address questions of poverty in our households and communities through those kinds of holistic interventions. But the training becomes important. Again, it goes back to that investment readiness point of view to mitigate this dependency question. And of course, in certain instances, it will be there. But I think the structure of interventions needs to be able to sort of filter out, the ones that might just purely for dependency. Sometimes, in the South African case, it is sometimes for survivalist purposes. Because of high levels of unemployment and poverty. But then that's also where you see the hunger and the drive for young people as well.
Yeah. All right. So now I'm just going to come through back to you again to say, as an economist, how do you see the macroeconomic landscape of South Africa from a youth perspective? And I'm not saying that you're not a youth.
Yes.
But I think just to put yourself, in the shoes of a young person and to basically not put it in economic terms, but just to lay it out with layman's term to say, how do you see the macroeconomic landscape of South Africa?
Sure. I think the macroeconomic landscape, it does require a lot of youth energy and innovation. I was pleasantly surprised over the past couple of years, and that's why I perhaps I have a bias towards the creative and cultural industry.
I can tell.
And I don't come from that industry.
Yeah.
I'm, as you mentioned, trained as an economist, and I'm a finance person. But there's something special that happens there.
Sure.
That I think it's what an economy needs, which is innovation. When you see the extent to which, musicians might have a debate and say if Amapiano is still a thing now or not, I don't know.
No, we're still in.
We're still in.
No,
Okay.
no, heavy.
I know there's the compo as well, and there's a lot. They're coming in. Okay. Yeah. Come and yes.
No,
okay.
We're still good.
We're still okay. So the export of Amapiano from South Africa as a case in point. It's a homebred innovation in an industry that was not earning an income before through that genre of music. All of a sudden, you find young people and young artists who are earning foreign exchange.
Sure.
For us, in economic terms, it goes into our national accounts. We then see foreign exchange as a contribution of that sector in our national accounts, purely because of youth innovation and youth energy. Young people in my mother's room somewhere, I have Fruity Loops and whatever.
Literally.
And I'm making a banger. And I think it's that kind of youth energy and youth innovation that our economy needs at a macroeconomic level across industries that I think will take us forward.
No, I think that's such a great perspective that you're giving. And for a lot of young people, it's not every day that, particularly with the arts, it's not every day that, from home to, different interviews that are being done. I think there's so much advocacy now, going into the arts. And I think the assumption is just that it's creativity at the back of a screen or at the back of a chair. We're talking now the arts within academic institutions. How do we then direct that from school? And the reason why I'm saying from school, I'm drawing it back to where we started our conversation to say from early childhood development, how do we nourish that element, particularly for the arts? And I'll come through to the to the other elements, but for the arts, how do we then nourish that from ECD down to our young people? Yeah,
I think there's a lot of ways. Of course, I was at a specific function with the former commissioner of SARS, Prof. Kiesvetter. And I think we're at a function, he had just finished addressing, and then they played some music, and we were, dancing.
Gosh,
You know when serious people are dancing,
yeah, I
like,
can see the
oh, hey, you
moves.
can move, man. Like, okay.
Yeah.
So I then ask him, Commissioner, hey, you can move, eh?
Mm,
And then he says, well, we first learned how to dance before we could speak.
sure.
So even as kids, before we could speak, the first thing that we do
We
is
move.
to move and it's to
Gotcha.
dance. So it's an inherent capability that we have as people. And so I think that can be nourished because it's in our system.
Mm,
It's really tapping into those
yeah.
capabilities at an early age that I think can create pathways, even across other areas of education. You find some of the best teachers at the National Teaching Awards. When you look at their methodologies, or I think in education terms, they call it pedagogy.
Yes.
Some of them teach mathematics and even language through music.
Yeah. I mean, it happens a lot. We see it on TikTok.
Exactly.
And I think people are fighting it to say, no, the teachers of today, but they're moving with innovation. And you find that
Yes.
it's the young teachers coming into.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely. So
Sure.
tapping into that, I think it's an innovative way or an innovative lens to even how we, view teaching and learning as well, in the context that we're in.
So I'm going to come to a very interesting conversation that is currently, going about, which is artificial intelligence. And I'm not going to necessarily go too deep into the question, and I'm just going to have the conversation flow into that. I'm just going to ask you, when the concept, or rather when AI started, booming, and the conversation around AI started booming, at home, comfortable, no suit, no tie, what was your thought when it comes to AI and young people? And I'm asking this to say, just for you to just sit back and have a reflective moment to say, prior to AI going and the conversations going and the aiding of artificial intelligence going, immediately when it went, how, or rather, what was your thoughts when it came to that? And then we'll come to currently where where you're sitting with artificial intelligence as it relates to young people.
Look, I think firstly it was mind-boggling, that there's this kind of technology that is available and what you can do with it, and the amount of time that it's able to reduce for you in terms of certain tasks.
Sure.
But when I looked at it, where does this thing come from? AI as a technology and as a concept was conceptualized in the 1950s by mathematicians in the US. Again, that question around right idea, maybe at the wrong time. Or right business at the wrong time, So that was interesting for me, that it's not something from the 2000s. It's a capability and technology that's been there for quite some time. So I was quite fascinated by it. Where are young people located as a consequence of I think it presents a massive opportunity in terms of democratizing certain capabilities that ordinarily would be expensive for young people. I also do think, everything in life, everything with moderation, that there are certain risks that we should safeguard. And for me, I think where young people are concerned, AI should be human and youth-centric. Okay. In other words, it shouldn't be the dictates of the technology that directs human beings and the youth focus. It should be human beings and the youth focus that directs the dictates of the technology and what we use it for. Because I think if it's the inverse, then it poses a risk to society, it poses a risk to young people. But if we leverage it for the purposes of driving youth development in meaningful ways, and in addressing some deepened sort of challenges that young people face, then it becomes more of a value add. So I think now in hindsight, that's part of the thinking right now. Okay. And even in how we responsibly use AI is also through that particular lens.
Do you think it's something that should be incorporated into somewhat of, our learning curriculum? I mean, years ago, we didn't think that coding would be such a big deal within our learning and education system. Do you think it's something that should be, included in our learning systems, essentially to prepare our young people so that when they get into the working environment? I went to a workshop the other day, and this old Tani said to me, you know what, Misaki, I really, really don't like young people. Everything is just a copy and paste from ChatGPT. And I'm thinking, well, yes, we're using it.
Yeah.
But I think what came in mind was that, yes, we are using it, but the how is really, you know, what is lacking. Because I think essentially as young people, we're going there and we're trying to, you know, fit up with innovation, and we're trying to basically match up with the innovation that is coming up with the fourth industrial revolution. We're really trying to catch up. However, are we aided enough to basically, and are we enabled enough to utilize the technology? So do you think it's something that should be included in our curriculum at an earlier age, or is it something that really can be just a blend over time?
I don't think we have a choice, because if we are to be a competitive country, we do need to integrate it in our education system. But we do need to be responsible in that integration.
Sure.
And in the oversight of the use of that technology, so that it does not have the adverse effect. You know, brainstorming between us as a team without the use of technology, the capabilities of human beings to remember and to be more engaged in that development process becomes more enriching compared to, you know, a prompt, because then it doesn't come from here. So that's part of, I think, the risks that sometimes comes with not responsibly using technologies such as AI.
Okay.
So I think in the use of it, we do need to do so responsibly. But at the same time, again, everything should be balanced. We don't have a choice but to integrate it, because if we want to compete with other countries and other young people in other countries, then we do have to, you know, define for ourselves what is the most meaningful way to use it.
To utilize it. And in terms of the regulatory elements around it, I'm very curious to know. I think I always go back to regulation, because when it comes to something like that, there is always going to be, you know, caveats around how it should be used. I mean, you know, I think the one conversation that was going is that, you know, we had an AI toolkit that came out, but it was from AI, and there were a lot of interesting elements on it. How do we navigate that?
Toolkits are very useful, and are toolkits that we can live. But again, everything should be done and managed responsibly. Particularly, again, I want to locate it in the developing economy context.
Okay.
You know, South Africa and, of course, the African continent has a leapfrog opportunity that still exists. There are, and again, earlier we spoke about infrastructure. Not only infrastructure around roads and you know, electrical and so forth, but even infrastructure that relates to what is required for higher demand for energy, because we are consuming more energy as a result of AI, for example, hence data centers. So there's that opportunity that does exist in terms of the creation of more jobs for young people.
Okay.
The extent to which even the analytics of how, you know, the efficiency of our economy exists, and we're able to do it at a shorter and at a more efficient pace because we're leveraging this technology. But at the same time, there are other risks that emerge. You know, cybersecurity is a case in point. A lot of companies, banks, financial services, public institutions are then faced with cybersecurity risks. Now, because of AI as well, it also increases, you know, the potential to have higher levels of cyber sort of threats for organizations.
Yeah.
So it should be done with a very good balance, and also ensuring that, again, the human-centric and youth-centric lens and approach to using this technology is really embedded in our approach. Otherwise, it should be constituted as unethical.
Sure.
Finally, I think the governance of AI in institutions. We know that sometimes, depending on who's programming it, it can have certain biases. And so those biases can reinforce the deepened inequalities that we have in our society.
Yeah.
So the governance of AI needs to be something that is treated very carefully and consistently as well, given that it's a technology that changes rapidly as well.
All right. So I think just as we started, the aim of the conversation was for it to be strategic, was for it to be meaningful, and for it to be insightful, and also inspiring for young people. We dived into quite a lot of deep light chats, as young people would say. And I think, what's that one parting gift and parting, words of encouragement and motivation that you would like to give to young people? And I think on that note, please do not forget to clock it at the end of at the end of that, because that would be a great parting gift as well.
Okay. No, thanks. I think so. This year is the 50th anniversary of the 1976 Youth Uprisings, and the theme for this 50th anniversary is Reset at 50. The future calls, and young people. It's to communicate that young people, we have an appointment with the future, and that future is now. And we have that responsibility amongst ourselves to take charge of the responsibility or the future that we want to see happen. And my chat is the onus is on us to really define what the next 50 years looks like. And that is my chat. Pocket.
Okay. I think from me, Masake, my name loosely translated to let us build. Mine is to build conversation, build strategy, and build communities for our young people to thrive, ask the difficult questions, and to be met with the answers as well. From me, Masake, I'd like to say thank you, Lesedi.